Hi and welcome to another narration presented by yours truly, Cryptids Roost. Please be so kind as to throat punch the like button and smack the ass of the subscription button as well. And remember to tap the notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. Oh, and don't forget to share the video far and wide. This will all help with YouTube's algorithm and will help promote the channel more. If you enjoy listening to the following story, be sure to pop over to the author's Reddit profile and drop them a line, or even give them a glowing review. I'm sure they would appreciate it. The link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not. Camp Wanahee, Part 9. This fantastic story is written by Wanahee, a wonderful author over on Reddit's NoSleep subreddit. To catch up, check the links for a compilation of the previous parts. Okay, I need to make this one quick. We don't have a lot of time before things finally go down. It looks like we have a choice of stopping Melixodrak, but it's slim. Thankfully, the process to summon the Mother of Demons is a slow one, which has benefited us. After returning and falling into our respective comas for a time, we were filled in on what had happened. Jupiter had to put on a camper uprising started by the three I mentioned before. They learned how to make a chloroform somehow and had knocked out several counsellors that they were trying to drag into the woods to sacrifice. We no longer have any bleach as a result, since Jupiter figured he didn't want to be dealing with that anymore. Killed a bunch of the grass, which I'm sure will be my job to deal with once all of this is over. Apparently, none of the creatures have been able to breach into the clearing around Camp Wanahee. Jupiter had said they had tried to do so on several occasions, sending swarms of monstrous creatures this direction. However, every time they step into the clearing, there is some wall that is keeping them out. Said the first time it happened, scared them all to death. The demons had tried to be sneaky, but once they crossed into the field, there was a flash of pale green light that threw them back. The demons tried this a few more times, according to Jupiter and the other counsellors. All of these have met with failure. They even sent some flying monstrosities that looked like a cross between a giant bat and an octopus to see if they could pass over the barrier, but were unsuccessful, as it wasn't a wall but a dome. Regardless, they've continued trying to break through, even if they are still unsuccessful. I guess they don't like sitting around and waiting. The traveller looked at the barrier, confirming that it was magical in some way, but it wouldn't hold forever. The attacks on it were taking a toll. Speaking of the traveller, she is doing better. Found out her name is actually Anikia Trovinik. We have taken to calling her Annie, since most of us are having difficulty with whatever Eastern European dialect that name comes from. She doesn't have an accent, at least not one that any of us can detect, which is surprising given her supposedly incredible age. Annie has started to gain weight again, the atrophy of her muscles disappearing much more rapidly than any of us suspected with each day. The curious thing to me, however, were her hands. The splits between the bones in the palms had a silver liquid that congealed there. It looked as if she had taken silver tape and placed it over the gaps. Upon closer inspection, you could see that it moved and flowed with her movements, but restricted movement to the normal range to prevent further damage. Annie said she had learnt about the process from a Mesdian blood caller on what she called the plane of Veshin. It's made from an awful sounding product from a strange organ in an impossible for me to pronounce or spell creature. She also found that if you took ketchup, which we needed to use up, and mixed it with the mercury of a thermometer, which I now have to buy a few more of, then let it sit out in the full moon for 3 hours and 6 minutes exactly, you can create something with a similar effect. If you do it wrong, however, you'll probably die from mercury poisoning. Sounds kind of 50-50 to me, but you can't argue with the results. The first day after returning from our expedition was dedicated mostly to us taking it easy, but I found myself getting stir-crazy by the evening. There hadn't been any fires since everything started happening, but I needed the comforting smell of smoke and the crackle of burning wood, something familiar and safe. So I started one in the smaller fire pit used by the counsellors when they decide to stay up and chat after the campers are down. Not long after, as the sun was setting and twilight was setting in, I had a nice fire blazing, sending sparks to the sky where they dimmed among the appearing stars. I spent a long time staring into the flames, watching them dance, flit and flicker. There was something peaceful and primal about fire. It made sense that such a thing was from the gods. There is so much power within fire. It's there, you can see and feel it, but you can't hold it. It's ethereal and beautiful. It can't be harnessed and used to work amazing modern wonders, but left to itself it can consume and destroy without a second thought. My musings were interrupted when there was a splash of liquid which erupted into a fireball. The sudden blast of heat and light caused me to flail backwards, tipping my camping chair over and landing on my back. I clumsily got to my feet to see Coot there laughing his arse off, an empty bottle of moonshine in his hand. "What the fuck, Coot? Are you trying to kill me?" I asked, grabbing my chair and setting it back up. "You might as well have thrown gas into the fire." Coot unfolded a chair of his own and sat down, wiping tears from his eyes. "God, that never gets old," he sighed as he sat back into the chair. "And you overreact too much, Carl. It would have only singed your hair. You weren't that close to it." I huffed as I sat back down into the chair. "You're a lunatic," I said, with a shake of my head. "Why else would they have called me Coot? I'm a crazy old man," he replied, lighting a cigarette and taking a long drag. "Been crazy since I got here, just like you." "Fair point," I replied, leaning back. "I did miss this," Coot said quietly as he gazed into the fire. "I haven't been around the fire in the years since I left. It's nice, even with all the crazy shit going on, to have something so familiar." "I couldn't agree more," came a woman's voice from behind us. I looked behind to see that it was Annie, the light reflecting on the metallic lines on her hands. It was strange to see this person, who was obviously ancient, wearing an old-fashioned shorts and a Camp Wanahee shirt that fit much better. "Do you mind if I join both of you?" Her voice was smooth. It made me think of the lake when it was undisturbed and glassy, like you could step on it and glide to the other side. "I don't care," Coot said, pointing to the other chairs. "Help yourself." Annie retrieved one of the folding chairs and after fiddling with it, figured out how to open it up, and she sat in it in one fluid motion. Her brown hair reached her mid-shoulder, which complemented her alabaster skin, and as for being incredibly old, she didn't look older than someone in her 30s. Imagine the only good-looking female teacher in your school, there's usually only one, and you've pretty much got it pegged down. "It's been so very long since I've been around a fire," Annie said wistfully. "My mother used to tell my siblings and I stories around the fire as the camp was set up. I remember eating charred fish, seasoned with the salt of the sea and the smoke of the fire. I do miss those days." "That does sound nice, living the simple life, only focusing on where you will go next and what you'll eat," Coot nodded. "Yeah, that sounds real nice." "Oh, it was absolutely miserable most of the time," she said, still looking at the fire. "So many of the people I knew died from simple things, infections, bad food, bad water and so on. I would spend nights shivering from the cold or pass out from dehydration when we couldn't find any water. It was terrible. But I still get nostalgic," Annie shrugged. Coot and I shared an, okay, look. "Well, I'm glad that things have improved then," I said, hesitantly. "How are you handling everything, Annie, being back in the world again?" Annie's brows knit together as she pondered the question. I suppose the best way to describe it would be that I have been severely traumatized after spending decades under the control of a homicidal parasite. I was responsible for the death and or infection of a large number of people. However, I am also no longer under the control of that parasite which was using my body against my will. So that is an overwhelming positive turn of events," she said as she stared into the fire. Annie was quiet for a moment longer. "So I suppose the jury is still out on how I'm doing. We'll have to give it more time." "Well, that's better than one can expect, given the situation," Coot said with a chuckle. "Yes, I thought so too," Annie said, smiling. "If you don't mind me asking, Annie," I said, "how did you get infected in the first place?" Annie kept looking into the fire, though the smile faded. "I have a problem. I have an incurable case of wanderlust. See, when I was a child, I would always wander off. I wanted to see something new, something strange, to find caves, rivers and hidden places. I wanted to go beyond the oceans, to see what was far beyond it. When I would look into the sky at night and see the lights twinkling, I dreamed of dancing with them. One day, after I must have been around 16 years old, I went wandering. I found a cave that I had never seen before, and I hoped to find something exciting inside, which I did. I found a man. He had skin as dark as the night sky and was not at all surprised to see me. He wore strange things that didn't look like the skins that my people wore. They were bright and colourful, like the meadows in the southern lands. His name was Vekidan Kirillian. He said he had been expecting me, so he could show me the wonders of the world and beyond. He taught me so many things. When I had reached my 22nd year, he helped me perform the ritual to slow my aging. It strengthened my body, made it so that I would never need food or water. I wouldn't need to breathe. Time would also have very little effect on me. I can still be killed, just not in mundane ways." She smiled and chuckled to herself. "What's so funny?" Coot asked. "It's just..." and he appeared to be looking for the right words. "I know how to become immortal, but being immortal was never where I found joy. There are so many myths and legends in our world where there is the goal to achieve immortality. I understand why it is so appealing, because it was appealing to me. Having lived for so long, however, has made me realise it is highly overrated. It's a lonely existence at the end of the day, even with infinite planes of existence to travel to. Everyone else goes away eventually, but you're still around." "That is miserable," I agreed. I felt that. "That's what I've experienced for several years, only without immortality and jumping to different planes. I wondered if that made my life as difficult or more difficult than hers. I quickly came to the conclusion I shouldn't compare and assume that both sucked in their own unique yet similar ways. Yes, well, I have still enjoyed my life. There were so many great things I learned. I was able to go wherever I wanted," and he smiled at memories she didn't share. "Don't get me wrong, I still have found plenty of awful places as well, more than the good places, truth be told. But good and bad are all a matter of perspective in the end. Regardless, back in 1894, I had grown a little careless. I had been doing this for a few millennia by that point, and believed I knew what I was doing. I decided to go through a door without taking the necessary precautions. The plane I encountered was desolate, the plant life was non-existent, and the fauna all looked similar, like the others you saw, but it infected everything, including animals. I got too close to one of them while trying to understand what I was seeing, and was pierced to the thigh. I was able to incapacitate the creature and get back through the doorway, which I sealed. Counting myself lucky, I thought nothing else of it and went about my life. However, the wound never healed. Instead, a fleshy growth began to form. I thought it was a scar tissue at first, but it spread. I noticed how the growth looked similar to the creature on the other plane. I knew I had a problem and tried to find answers, ways to stop it. It was slow in spreading, taking several years before it started to impede my movements. She shook her head. That's the strange thing about it. It doesn't take over the body, it overpowers it. It requires a living structure it can grip to, which it can then move through its own power. It immobilized my joints slowly, which caused my muscles to atrophy to the point where I couldn't fight it anymore. I tried to contact the others of my order. They knew what it was, and they knew it was a death sentence. They were apologetic, but they refused to come near me. They cut me off from them and left me here in my home to be consumed. Coot shook his head and went to take a drag from his cigarette, but found that it had burned away, as he had been entranced with the story. He grunted and threw the filter into the fire. Sounds pretty cold-hearted for them to do that to you, Coot said as he lit another cigarette. And that's saying something coming from me. Annie shrugged. It was my own doing. There are things out there that are incredibly dangerous. Things and forces that have devastated entire planes of existence. They wanted to ensure it would stay here, hopefully on just this planet. This parasite is strange since it spread so slowly. Such things are usually very aggressive. I suppose with how indestructible it is, it never needed to be quick about the process. What was it like? I asked. The almost century of being a prisoner within my body as something else used it for its own purpose? Annie asked, turning to me with a raised eyebrow. I said, feeling intimidated by her gaze. Yeah, that. It was awful, she whispered. I didn't know exactly what was happening when it took a victim, but I had an idea. I could hear the screams. I could feel it. Annie shuddered. The memories had a very visceral effect on her. That's why I would scream. I wanted to make sure that I could give people the chance to escape. It's very good at being quiet, of using our structure to make itself into a deadly predator. Jesus, I said, looking back into the fire. That must have been terrible. Annie just nodded. We sat in silence for a long time after that. Coot stood up and stretched. Well, I didn't sleep much last night, and I think the exhaustion and alcohol is going to finally knock me the hell out. He flicked the end of his cigarette into the flames, then headed towards one of the empty cabins. Don't burn down the forest, he called over his shoulder. I believe I should get some more sleep too, Annie said as she stretched and moved to stand up. Can I ask you something first? I kept my eyes on the fire. Annie sighed. Whether it was from finishing her stretch or being inconvenienced by me, I couldn't tell. Sure, what is it? Why are things the way they are here? I asked quietly, turning my gaze from the fire to her. You've been here, in this area, for a very long time. Why are there such strange things here? Why do we forget about it unless something traumatic happened that we caused? Annie sat there, contemplating as she stared into the embers. Those are very heavy questions, Carl. Why did you wait until I wanted to go to bed to ask me? Don't know, it just came to me, I said. I've been kept in the dark for so long, I just need to have some sort of answer, if you have any. She sighed and sat back down. Fine, I will answer what I can, only because you saved me. Sure, I said, feeling hopeful. Finally someone who could give me answers. This is what I had needed. Maybe I could find a way to get out of this place. This place is special. There are certain areas in every world that have a concentration of magic, energy, or whatever you want to call it. These areas are able to slip the minds of most creatures due to that concentration. A lot of them are small. Passing through them leaves a gap in your recollection, a vague idea of being somewhere, but nothing more. These places are where myths and legends come from, Annie said. Think of them as places like the Bermuda Triangle, only real instead of the result of coincidence. This is one of the largest areas like it on Earth. I decided to make my home here because it would keep me safe from others, so I could be forgotten by those who saw me and not have to explain my immortality. That way I can watch over this little planet. I have kept it from disaster on several occasions, something the others of my order usually wouldn't do. Okay, but why do some of us remember when we've been responsible for something traumatic? I asked. No amount of magic can rid someone of guilt, Carl, she said, looking at me, and he smiled at me in a way that apologised for the truthfulness of the fact. We must live with the things that we have done. When things like that happen, not even the power in these places can cause one to forget them. Well, how do I get rid of the guilt I feel then? I whispered. Annie let out a long breath. I don't know. I'm ancient, and I don't have an answer for that. I have done a lot of things that I'm not proud of, same as everyone else. I suppose the only thing you can do is try yourself to be better, she shrugged. Why does the guilt hold you back as much as it does? Because I betrayed someone, I said. Someone I knew. I only knew her for a month, so perhaps didn't know her very well, but I wanted to know more about her. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to be everything to her. Tears began to burn my eyes. I was starting to love her, I think. I know I wanted to love her. I think that love is still here, but I can't resolve it. I can't continue falling in love with her because she's gone. I can't fall out of love with her because she stays the same in my mind. She stays the same as the girl I met, who was fun and got me out of my shell, who saw something in me that I couldn't, and she never shared. I could see it in her eyes. Annie looked at me, studied me. You're in love with a girl you knew for only a month that you somehow managed to get killed. Is that right? I wiped my eyes and sniffed. Okay, it sounds crazy when you say it like that, I said, but yes, I am. Her name is Ruby. I try to forget her, but I see her in the woods sometimes. Sometimes I hear her screams. She accuses me of things, curses me, wants me dead. I can't get mad at her for that, though. I've wanted the same thing at times. And why is that? Because I let her down. I abandoned her when she needed me. She died when I should have been the one to die. And why did you deserve to die? Annie asked. Because she was better than me. Ruby was a good person, I said with desperation. I didn't like these questions. Why did they hurt so much? And you weren't? You aren't a good person? Annie had her eyebrows raised. Her eyes were piercing, the light from the fire making them glow like embers. No, I don't believe I am, I said, turning my eyes away from hers. I wouldn't have left her. I wouldn't have run away if I had been. I would have stayed. I at least would have died with her. Annie didn't reply, though I could feel her watching me. The cracks from the fire were deafening in that silence, but I was glad for something to fill the void. Damn woman is immortal, has lived for millennia, and I get no answers from her, just more questions. Figures, I thought. We all have guilt for many things, Carl West. Every burden is as unique as the person who bears it. You must find the solution. It isn't something I can do for you, Annie said, and she sounded truly sympathetic. You've got a lot of things weighing on you. I have little knowledge in these areas, but I feel that you will be strong enough to get through this. I didn't know what to make of that. It was, and wasn't, an answer at the same time. I turned to ask her what she meant, but she was gone. I sat for a time on my own, watching the fire dim and die. I wrestled with my thoughts and emotions, which had only become more confusing from this conversation. And in that swirl of conflicting thoughts and emotions, I found myself back there, reliving a memory I had shoved so far down. I thought. I hoped I would never see it again. It came in waves, seeing Ruby, her auburn hair in a ponytail that draped down her back, pulling me into the forest. Come on, it's not much further. I promise it'll be worth it. "We shouldn't be out here this late," I said. "It won't be long. I promise neither of us will get caught," she said, looking over her shoulder and giving me a reassuring smile. I felt warm, cheeks flushed. We were in the clearing. We got there sooner than I expected. I knew we had to have walked for a mile, but we were already there. The moon had a pale blue hue to it, casting everything in a ghostly light. I saw a stream nearby, shimmering in the reflected light of the stars and moon, babbling quietly as it travelled. Ruby opened her arms with her eyebrows raised. "Well?" "It's very pretty," I admitted. "You were right. Makes me think of a fairy tale, ones with trolls and talking animals." "The ones where the children get lost in a forest, they get eaten or die in a horrible way?" I asked with a raised eyebrow. Ruby smiled. "Yep, those ones." "Well, that puts a sinister twist on this place," I said. "Why did you have to go and ruin it?" She rolled her eyes. Ruby opened her mouth to say something, but I never heard it. I was on my back now. The grass was cool against my skin. I felt something warm to my right. Ruby. She was lying next to me, against me, my arm around her, cradling her. My hand was on her chest. Delicate fingers traced lines and patterns. I did the same thing with my hand on her back, memorising the feeling of the shirt she wore and how it hugged her body. I was looking at the moon. It seemed so strange. What was wrong with it? Something felt off. Ruby was speaking. It was hard to focus on what she was saying. "Don't know about that. Why would I forget you when I leave here?" Ruby said. "I like you, Carl. I'm not going to forget you." "Because this place doesn't make sense. I saw a 3-foot crab the other day going through the garbage. Coob made me go scare it away with a broom." I shrugged. "Maybe we will forget each other when we leave." I don't like the idea. It made a pit in my stomach. "Carl," she whispered, turning my head to look at her, "do you like me?" "Yeah, I like you," I said. If only you knew, I thought. Ruby stared into my eyes. I could have sworn she saw something. What was it? She smiled, the corners of her hazel eyes wrinkling. I felt pressure on the back of my neck, her hand. Ruby was pulling me closer. My heart began racing. "No, run. Something within me," she said. I was afraid. Why was I afraid? Ruby's lips were warm and soft, full of life and passion. "I don't care if I forget her after we leave," I remember thinking. "I will enjoy this time with her as long as I have it. I will never forget her when I'm here." The moment stretched and felt like an eternity. So simple and innocent. I heard her inhale sharply from the kiss. I could smell the stale sweat under the perfume she was wearing. I felt her fingers tighten ever so slightly on the nape of my neck. I heard something. That was odd. I heard something. Then I realised I hadn't heard anything but Ruby and the river for some time. No bugs, no animals, nothing. But I heard something. I heard it again. It was a weak, rasping whistle. It started off strong before falling and becoming no more than a hushed exhale. Ruby looked alarmed as I did. I began to stand, looking in the direction the sound had come from, squinting to try to pierce the shadows of the forest. "What was that?" Ruby asked as she stood up next to me, her hand finding mine. "Do you see anything?" "No, but I think I saw something, and judging by Ruby's gasp, she did too. It was blacker than the shadows, and it was moving through the woods. It was gliding, a mass of rounded shapes that floated in the dark. Parts of it drug against the ground. It made no sound, but the whistle came again. It was near the clearing. Light glistened off the various shapes, and I thought I saw faces. Faces writhing in agony as light danced across their obscure, glistening features. "Run," I said, taking off towards Wanahee. Ruby was close behind me. I knew we weren't far from camp. I knew we would be there soon. we would be safe when we got there. I heard a gasp from behind, the sound of stumbling and falling, branches snapping and crying out in pain. I stopped to go back, hearing Ruby scream my name. Wait, no, that wasn't right. That wasn't Ruby's voice. That was a man's voice. I felt something grab me. It picked me up and shook me. I screamed and flailed, managing to strike whatever it was. I heard a soft grunt. My mind snapped back to reality. I was being held up by Jupiter. The solid mass of man looked at me with a raised eyebrow. If I didn't need your help, he said as he sat me roughly back on my feet, I would beat your ass for hitting me. Come on. Jupiter took off towards the centre of camp, where I heard some sort of commotion and saw the glow of a fire lighting the distant trees. I was shaking, the very core of me trembling from the dream. I must have dozed off. Fuck, it felt so real. Going from that to this, being ripped violently from horror into the unknown, was shocking. Not having any better options, I ran after Jupiter. What's going on? I asked as I caught up with him. A bunch of the campers have turned on the counsellors, Jupiter said. Again. Again? I said, incredulously. Keep your voice down, he hissed. They've put some sort of magic seal on a bunch of the cabins, locking in most of the counsellors. You and I are the only two that weren't in one, so we got to do something. He stopped by the edge of a cabin, looking around the corner. Jupiter turned back to me. I must have looked as ragged as I felt. You good, Carl? I nodded. Yeah, just getting over being woken up violently from a really bad nightmare. Oh, good, he said in a manner that was definitely too cheerful as he motioned for me to take a look. This won't be too much of a shock then. What are you talking about? Oh my God, I said as I saw what Jupiter was talking about. The best way to describe what I saw was a ritual that would soon culminate in a human sacrifice. There was an enormous fire burning in the clearing outside of any designated fire pit, and 5 of the tables from the mess hall that had been arranged around it. The end that was away from the fire had been lifted up so I could see a figure strapped to each of the tables. At the head of the fire, there were 3 robed figures, each of them definitely campers. They had their backs to us as they faced the fire and a sizable group of other campers. But my guess, there had to be 20 or 30. They all stood outside the 5 tables, looking inward at the fire. I could hear them all chanting in some weird language that made my hair stand on end. More because it was a bunch of kids, and not because of the language. Are the 3 there in the robes, Mikkel, Aria and Sarah, the ones who ran away and came back? Jupiter said. I sighed. Kids today have no proper respect for the dangers of an eldritch evils, do they? Obviously. So what's the plan? Got any weapons? I asked, turning back to him. I have my rifle in my truck, he said, rubbing his chin. Want to shoot a bunch of kids? I've thought about it, but probably not, I sighed. 2 of us against that many kids. You think we can take them? Well, they're children, so I don't think they're going to give us too much trouble, right? Yeah, you've got a point. Right, Jupiter said. So should we just go up and fight them all? I really don't think that's the best way to go about it, I said thoughtfully. You said last time that the others came out of their trance once the 3 were knocked out, or incapacitated in some way, yeah? Jupiter nodded. Right. It was creepy as hell. Okay, so I think the best chance we have is to take out Mikkel and his friends. So let's go and tackle the creeps. Take them out in some way. It's not imaginative, but it should work, right? I asked. Sure, Jupiter said with a shrug. I'd rather not have to beat up a bunch of children. If I only have to beat up a couple, that works for me. I looked around the corner again to see Mikkel, the leader of the 3, pulling out a knife, because, of course, it was a knife. There was nothing original happening here. It would be nice if a cult would come up with a more interesting way to sacrifice people once in a while. My criticisms aside, things were going to kick off soon. We needed to go. I nodded to Tuita and we both began running towards the fire. We cleared the group of cabins into the field, about 40 yards separating us from the kids. I have to say that I was starting to get really sick of running at this point. As the familiar burn began in my lungs, I reflected upon the current situation. Here I was, trying to save camp counsellors from being sacrificed to a demon from another plane by adolescent camper cultists. The purpose of said sacrifice is an attempt to drop the supernatural defences of a summer camp to allow an army of demons to slaughter all of us. God, my life is an absolute nightmare of nonsense, I thought as Tuita and I closed the distance to the campers. I tackled Mikhail to the ground. There was a grunt and he hissed in a strange language that I couldn't understand. I tried to get my arm into a chokehold, but he wriggled quickly out of my grip. I don't know if it was due to how small he was. The kid was only 13, but he was very short and very skinny. Think of Gollum from Lord of the Rings. Whatever the reason, I had a hard time keeping hold of him. Mikhail got to his feet and turned around to face me. I was not really prepared for the sight that greeted me. Mikhail wasn't looking too hot. The skin on his face was a sickly jaundiced yellow. The colour of his eyes looked muted and drained. In the light of the fire, I could see that he was managing to make the alien sounds due to his jaw, bone and all being split down the middle. It opened as he spoke, revealing a second set of jagged teeth that lined it. Mikhail began to spew some very alien sounding words, raising the knife as he did so. In response, I kicked him in the genitals, and by that I mean I pulled my leg back and tried to punt this kid to the goddamn moon. You might think this is beneath me. I am an adult. I shouldn't have resorted to violence against a child, especially when they were possibly possessed by an extra-dimensional being and or forces. You might think that this was grossly inappropriate, that there must have been a better way to handle the situation. Maybe you're right. However, I don't really give a shit, because the little monster dropped like a sack of potatoes. A mutant sack of popcorn that was now writhing on the ground, screaming in agony. I turned to Tuita and saw that he had managed to knock out both of the other kids, having one in the crook of each arm. He let them drop and they fell to the ground limply. They looked sickly like Mikhail, but thankfully their jaws were still intact. I smiled, satisfied at a job well done. The cult of campers turned to us. Our good feeling vanished real quick when I saw that they all looked really pissed off. Didn't you say that they stopped being all culty last time you took these three out? I asked quickly as I picked up Mikhail, who had just finished retching into the grass. Yep, looks like that ain't going to work this time. Great. I threw Mikhail over my shoulder. He didn't put up a fight since he was too busy sobbing from the pain. We needed to break the connection somehow. I looked around the camp and saw a possible solution. A peculiar building. New plan. Grab those two and follow me. We began running, followed by creepy silent campers. They weren't the most effective runners, luckily. I ran, hearing Mikhail say things in different languages. I did, however, make out, "My fucking Balith, and I'm gonna kill you, Carl Wetz." So he appeared to still be somewhat human, but now had a lisp that wasn't there before. That's what you get for getting involved in cults. We rounded a corner, the sound of a clumsy stampede behind us, and there it was, our possible salvation. The cabin that isn't always there, the ones that make you do a double take. I felt Mikhail attempting to fight me, but without a knife he wasn't too effective. We got to the cabin and I felt all the hair on my body stand on end as I passed into a very strong electrostatic field. I opened the door to the main portion of the cabin and chucked Mikhail in there, where he unceremoniously fell flat on his face. Tuita did the same with the other two, who collided with Mikhail as he tried to get up. I grabbed the door and held it shut. What good is this going to do, Carl? Jupiter asked as he saw the mob of cult kids come into view. Hopefully the cabin will vanish and it will cut the mind control, I said between bared teeth as I felt the three from the other side trying to pull the door open. The mob was getting closer. I could see nothing in their eyes but a desire to kill me. The problem with this plan, I was realising now, was the fact that I was dependent on luck that the cabin would disappear in time. Jupiter sighed. This better work, Carl. He cracked his knuckles and stepped between me and the kids. I'll hold them off as long as I can. In almost every scenario, this wasn't the moment where you get chills at someone sacrificing themselves to save everyone. While this was the case, it was somehow tarnished by the fact that Jupiter began to attack a group of kids. I saw him grab a girl and toss her like a rag doll, sweeping the legs of several others. Jupiter also landed several solid punches on a handful of kids. It proved to be useless, however, as he was overwhelmed and piled on by a dozen or more. I heard him grunting and cursing them from the pile. The others swarmed around Jupiter, coming for me. Come on, I said as they drew closer. I attempted to kick them away, but they were too many, and I was not very effective at kicking them to begin with. I couldn't let go of the door in the vain hope it would vanish. I felt all of their hands grab me and began pulling me away, reminding me of when I was being chased through the woods. I fought against them, but there were just too many. My grip slipped and I was ripped away from the door. They soon overpowered and piled on top of me. The door opened and I saw the three of them standing in the doorway. Mikhail had the creepiest smile I'd ever seen as he looked at me. He looked over the crowd and they all stared at him. This one, Mikhail said, pointing at me. They'll be sacrificed first, he said, really struggling to form words given his messed up jaw. Made the whole thing a lot less intimidating despite this very real danger of being ritually murdered. One of the kids from the crowd brought the knife that Mikhail had dropped by the fire. He took it and held it up for everyone to see. Mikhail began chanting again as the kids holding me pinned me on my back. Mikhail approached the doorway, knife raised. I felt a strange sensation, like I was standing next to a tunnel that a train was rocketing through and threatened to pull me in. There was a rushing sound, a pop, then silence. I looked to see that the cabin, finally, was gone. Mikhail and his cronies had been too busy with their victory to leave the cabin when the door opened. All of the other campers began to look around, really confused. A few vomited. Well, one vomited, then a few others had weak stomachs and it started a bit of a chain reaction. I got to my feet and went over to the now dispersing pile that hid Jupiter. He lay on his back, bruised and bloodied, but alive. I hate this place, Carl, Jupiter said as I helped him up. It's never anything simple up here. I just had to fight a group of kids. I don't like hitting kids, Carl. He spat out some blood. I also don't like getting my ass beat by a bunch of kids either. I don't know which bothers me more. I didn't really know what to say to that, so I just patted him on the shoulder. Thanks for the help, Jupiter. I had reached the end of my rope mentally, and had no more energy to give today. I probably should have gone and untied the other counsellors, or got the kids back to their cabins, but I didn't. I went to bed. There was a part of me that didn't want to. Remembering the things I had, it was hard to want to sleep. I was afraid I would be brought back into that memory, that I would have to relive it. I would have to finish it. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. I fell into a dreamless sleep. The next morning, most everything was back to normal. Got a few pats on the back from the other counsellors. We were all called together into the mess hall and decided what we should do. With the magic of the barrier failing, and Annie unable to do anything about it without taking it down entirely, we have to find a way to stop the demons before it gives out. By the end of the meeting, we decided that we were going to do what I had done the night before. We were going to charge into the opposing force and hope to reverse the summoning. That's the very simple version, and there's more to it, but I need to wrap this up now. Everything is going to be going down within a day or two, and there's going to be a lot of prep needed for it. I'll update you all later. Hopefully I'll have some good news. Don't forget, if you enjoyed that story, be sure to pop over to the author's Reddit profile and drop them a line, or even give them a glowing review. I'm sure they really would appreciate it. The link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. And don't forget to check out the merch store. The link will be in the description and also in the video thumbnail. And if you'd like an honourable mention, send in a snapshot of yourself with your purchase and I'll feature it in one of the videos. Have you written a creepypasta story you would like me to narrate? Have you had any cryptid sightings, paranormal or supernatural encounters, or even had a creepy or terrifying situation you would like to share? Well, I now have my very own subreddit community where you can submit your stories. The link for that is also in the thumbnail as well as below in the description. You can submit your stories there, or you can send them to cryptidsroost@gmail.com. If you wish to remain anonymous, that's fine with me. Now I also have a Facebook group, Twitter, Reddit and Discord. And if you'd like to support the channel and help make it grow, my PayPal is paypal.me/cryptidsroost. If you wish to remain anonymous, that's fine with me. Now I also have a Facebook group, Twitter, Reddit and Discord. And if you would like to support the channel and help make it grow, my PayPal is paypal.me/cryptidsroost, and any and all donations would be gratefully received. Again, that will also be below. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.